Hi, I'm Cameron Cooper, editor of the Law Management Journal, which is proudly published by the Australian Law Management Group, a committee of the Legal Practice section of the Law Council of Australia. The ALMG is releasing a series of podcasts. They're designed to help law firms manage the introduction of new anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing obligations. They'll come into force in Australia on July 1, 2026. In the second podcast of the series, we speak to Jackie Jones, an associate partner at Page Executive, which specialises in legal recruitment across Australia's East Coast. In this interview, Jackie tells Trish Carroll, an ALMG committee member and long-time consultant to law firms, how Aussie firms can enhance their brand and attract top talent by becoming an AML leader. We begin the interview with Trish asking Jackie about her current career role.
Well, thanks so much, Jackie, for being with us today. Just before we get started on the AML topic, can you tell me just a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely, Trish, and thanks so much for having me. So look, Canberra-based, I grew up with a family of lawyers, surrounded by the legal profession from an early point in my career. And look, instead of going straight into law myself, I pursued a business commerce degree where I was really fascinated around how organisations adapt, change and position themselves for commercial success. And then look, moved into a bit of an intersection of people and strategy and business now in my current role at Page Executive as an associate partner, heading up our legal practice. And look, it's really sort of supporting organisations to prepare for the future. It's about building resilient teams, structures, and supporting their organisations through change. And then alongside that, I'm also studying a law degree myself, Juris Doctor, part-time. And look, it's given me a really good oversight of sort of the compliance and frameworks that the legal sector is going through at the moment.
Well, that sounds like a good background for this topic. So you talk to lots of law firms, and what are you hearing from law firms about how they're tackling AML?
Absolutely. Look, I think the larger firms, they're already sort of making moves around what they need to prepare for and look at. They're implementing compliance and risk teams and hiring dedicated AML or CTF compliance officers. But look, I think for the smaller and mid-sized firms, really they're still in the sort of awareness phase. For a lot of the clients that I'm talking to, many are still asking, what does this actually mean for us? Do we need new staff? Do we need new capability? And how do we fit that within already quite tight budgets and workloads? So look, I think there's still a sense of uncertainty as to what that looks like for smaller firms. AUSTRAC is still outlining their sort of 5 or 6 key expectations that firms need to implement. And the finer detail, I think, is still evolving. So it's a little bit unsure, I think, at this stage. A lot of my clients are still looking at addressing time, money, resources, and how they can actually combat AML. I think the 3 big themes are really capacity, balancing obligations. The next is really clarity, knowing sort of where to start or what's going to be applicable to them, and then the capability behind that for them to really be safeguarded around AML.
Tackling AML, it's not the first challenge that firms have had from a compliance and risk perspective. So how is tackling AML different from other mandatory responsibilities?
Absolutely, Trish, and it's a good point that you raised there. I think the framework really for adapting to change is far and large the same, whether they're tackling cybersecurity risks or workplace health and safety. It's now AML, so it's quite similar. Really what I mean by that is there's policies and procedures and outlines that have been set out by AUSTRAC that law firms need to comply with, and it's very similar to what they've had to comply with previously on other mandatory requirements. So for law firms, it's really just stepping back, understanding what are the risks, what are the policies, and who has the right skill sets, either that they already have internally within the firm, or do they need to hire and retrain. So look, it requires the same approach. It's about risk identification, systems, staff, capability, and continuous review of those. But look, notwithstanding, obviously the subject matter is different. But again, I think lessons learned from law firms where they've handled these issues in the past can very much be applied to this, and the same intentions to roll through to combat AML.
I mean, you use the term combat. AML. Makes it sound as if we're kind of starting a war. But really, I mean, from a people and workplace change perspective, to make AML a change for good, because it's been created really to, I guess, to use your word, combat evil. What should firms be looking at from a people and workplace change perspective?
As we've shared, I think AML really is going to be just another layer where firms will have to apply the same change management principles. Look, a really good example of that we saw trickle through the legal sector was post-COVID, where we had law firms needing to really quickly pivot into remote work, adapting, bringing in new technologies, new policies, training staff on entirely new ways of working. And most did it incredibly well. So, look, I think by and large, AML can be treated in a very similar framework. It's really sort of a change program and it brings sort of lasting improvements. It's not just a compliance tick box process. So from a people perspective, I think firms really should be thinking about building awareness around AML into inductions and training for staff. So every staff member sees the complexities and their involvement in that, creating clear and practical policies and procedures that really help staff rather than overwhelm them. So it's about looking at sort of the use of technology to automate certain components, training and upskilling staff and adapting to new frameworks. I think particularly for small firms or sole practitioners, resources are going to be limited. Therefore, more than likely, they'll look to actually become their own compliance officer under the AML or CTF Act. So it's about looking at sort of sufficient resourcing, upskilling, and looking to ensure that they are responsible and comply to report into AUSTRAC. Look, we might see, as said, the likes of contractors trickling into law firms to support with this change, which we can touch on, Trish, I'm sure. But look, it's going to be, as said, a new evolution of capability across law firms, and more than likely managing partners or sole practitioners will need to look at adapting to this either by upskilling themselves to be their own compliance officers or looking at different ways that they can embed appropriate risk assessments, policies and procedures and governing frameworks.
Are there any unique challenges that you think smaller firms face in terms of, cost, time and access to expertise?
Absolutely. Look, I think small firms, they'll need to look at implementing an array of different things, quite critically an AML CTF program, an obligation to develop and maintain these programs, which will be costly and a resource that they'll need to look at embedding into the organisation. They will need to look at developing their own policies and procedures on how they deal with AML and the various risks that they will need to be across. And look, particularly, I think it all, as said, depends on firm to firm. The policies will need to be reviewed by every firm, individual to the nature of their client base and the services that they offer. But look, it will be critical for law firms to really understand the processes that AUSTRAC will be enforcing upon them, so they are in a position that they can roll through changes in AML quite smoothly.
Bearing all that in mind, do you think AML compliance could drive new ways of working and, any forms of innovation across the profession?
Absolutely. Look, I think we're talking here around efficiency. For small law firms, sole practitioners, they are already sort of wearing multiple hats a lot of the time. It will be, as said, a real test on ensuring businesses are run effectively and efficiently, that the right skill sets are being utilised. But look, for a lot of the time, this could actually be an opportunity for law firms to really demonstrate effective operations, that they are running effective businesses, and that they've got a streamlined procedure in place. I think it's an opportunity for law firms to really demonstrate their approach to initiatives that are occurring, new changes in the workplace, and how quickly and effectively they can adapt to still be sort of strong workplaces and effective in the market against external changes that occur. So I think looking at different methods here, Trish, but look, collaborative solutions really will come through, and it's about sort of educating on what are the requirements, how can they be effective, and then quickly looking at resourcing to make a very effective change.
I mean, when you're talking to candidates, what comes through from their perspective about the law firms that they might be considering and the role of compliance with everything from cybersecurity to workplace diversity? You know, what role do these sort of hygiene factors have, if you like, in people's decisions about where to work?
Absolutely. Look, I think strong AML compliance can absolutely be a brand enhancer, particularly for externals looking into the firm. For the clients of these law firms, it signals that the firm is risk aware, responsible, and a trusted advisor that they can help with winning through their matters, their tenders, building long-term relationships with clients, whether they're individual or corporate clients. And it signifies that these law firms are a trusted advisors for clients to commit to going through with. For employees, it's very much the same. It shows that the firm values integrity. It invests in systems and processes to both support both their clients and their staff. And it can be a real differentiator in recruitment and retention, Trish. A lot of the time when I'm working with candidates or practitioners across the market, these factors do come into their decision making around whether they do look to make a move or join those law firms. I think brand awareness is really critical nowadays, and law firms need to be looking at what else they're doing in terms of their external reputation and brand positioning. And if there's, as said, strong components around their effective policies, their ability to effectively move forward through change, that is a very effective and appealing position to be in as an employer. So from a reputational perspective, being proactive on AML really does assist law firms to avoid the reputational damage or regulatory breaches that we've seen across other professional service areas recently, failing to comply and brand consequences. So I think while AML starts as more so a regulatory requirement, it can also be used as a really strong marketing and talent tool. Firms that embrace it early on can be positioning themselves as industry leaders rather than reluctant followers against change.
So I'm curious to know, when you mentioned tenders before, and often in procurement exercises, organisations want to see these policies and procedures. And I think that's because they don't necessarily believe that they exist. So they want the evidence. So with candidates, how do they go about assessing whether a law firm's complied or not? Have you ever had a candidate ask to see a firm's policies and procedures?
It's a great question, Trish. And look, I think candidates are, whilst they might not be necessarily directly asking, can I see your compliance framework on AML? But they're more so now just making decision-making from a broader lens. They are talking with their counterparts. They are sort of hearing from their colleagues across the market, what was your experience in that law firm? I've heard this. What do you think about this? They're asking more broadly, they're thinking more broadly, and they are inquiring more intensively around the structure of law firms. They're becoming more aware and more sort of inquisitive around what potential organisations are doing. We've seen the same with the likes of ESG, DE&I, and other components that organisations are having to meet nowadays. It's not just about having an organisation that pays well and has good work. It's about what else do you offer as an organisation that is attractive. And a lot of the time, people are more conscious nowadays of stability, the economy. It's a complex economy that we're in nowadays. And so therefore, working in an organisation that is secure, progressive, aware of these changes and implementing new systems to go through these changes effectively, for a lot of the time, for an employee or a candidate, that is a really attractive proposition to be reviewing. And candidates have choice nowadays. It's gone are the days where job opportunities were limited. There is lots of opportunities and work out there for talented staff and talented professionals. So candidates have choice. And if one law firm is performing better than the other across these other additional aspects, such as strong procedures and policies, well, more than likely those candidates are going to be proceeding with those employers because of the other value propositions that they offer. So I think a lot of the time, clients that we work with, employers, professional service organisations, they do need to be aware that candidates are becoming really quite discerning around their next move and looking at these aspects of their organisation as a value add is really quite critical and will really assist them in attracting really talented professionals to join their organisations.
That's a really good way to wrap up this session, Jackie, because you've really taken us from seeing AML potentially as being another aspect of compliance to in fact being an asset in the way that firms present themselves to the market and how employees see their whole risk profile and how they manage themselves is really part of their decision-making process about which firms to go to. So it's not dissimilar to how clients feel as well. So I guess that also helps us when you talk before about in terms of cost, seeing compliance as a business as usual expense. So you've just got to factor in what this new era of compliance requires, but actually not seeing it so much as an expense as potentially an investment in both your reputation management, your employer brand, puts it in a really quite different light, I think. So thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely, Trish. And look, it goes without saying, exactly to your point, it's almost the same as budgeting for branding, their marketing, recruitment, hires, training. It's the same. Law firms, I would encourage a lot of law firms to look at this as another business investment, really, very much as to how they invest in marketing and branding. It's the same. Compliance, AML policies and implementation will be just as valuable to their long-term success, their stability and their attraction mechanisms to ensuring that they've got really strong risk profiles and they're an attractive employer in a very, very competitive market.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Trish. Thank you.